I'm Wilson Lai, and you're listening to Deep Cut. On Deep Cut, we usually compare a director's most popular film with a personal favorite chosen by one of us. We also discuss that director's life and career to bring in context that helps us view their movies as they may want us to. If you're enjoying the show, please rate and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts to help others discover the show. Better still, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or comment on episodes directly on Spotify. If you'd like to share a message with us, feel free to drop us an email at hello@deepcutpod.com. We read them, and we will try to get back to you. You can also find us at deepcutpod.com to find links to our socials, Discord, and Patreon. On this episode of the podcast, I went on a solo excursion late last year to the island of Peng Chau in Hong Kong to interview Ariel, Esteban, Cayer, and Pearl Chan, the founders of boutique film distributor Kani Releasing. Kani Releasing's mission is to further the availability of Asian cinema in North America. We spent an afternoon chatting about some of the films in their catalog and how they approach acquisitions and restorations. I really hope you enjoy our conversation. I am currently sitting in the office of Kani Releasing on Peng Chau Island with Pearl and Ariel. Pearl and Ariel, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you for having us and visiting us on our little island and our little office.
Yeah, thank you, Wilson.
Why don't we start off by you guys maybe introducing yourselves and introducing Kani Releasing.
Sure. Together, we run a small distribution company called Kani Releasing, which, despite being stationed here in Hong Kong, distributes Asian cinema in North America, US and Canada, as of 2022. It's been a few years of us doing our best to kind of bring what we think are underseen or undervalued or up-and-coming works of Hong Kong, Japanese, Filipino, mainland Chinese, Malaysian cinema to sort of a broader audience to the best of our ability, I would say.
Mm-hmm. That's great. I feel like I was saying this in the intro, but I do feel like there's sort of like a kinship between what we do with the podcast and what you guys do with sort of like highlighting lesser known titles and lesser known filmmakers to a wider cinema going audience. So I'm glad we're really like having this conversation. But I would really love to maybe start off by asking you guys maybe to explain to audiences that are maybe unfamiliar with what film distribution is or what distributors do. What do you guys do or like how do you guys operate within the film making and film going machine that we have?
We kind of started, I think, modeling ourselves more on boutique distribution or Blu-ray labels, boutique home video labels. We grew up with, be it, obviously, people like the Criterion Collection or Severin Films or Vinegar Syndrome, who are our distribution partners, companies, focused on resuscitating, restoring, preserving films on home video for home video audiences. And I think that was kind of the impetus of the project at first, or the means of delivery of the project at first, and which I think over time evolved into, as our interests kind of branched out, I think evolved into perhaps more of a traditional distribution model where we distribute films both theatrically, traditionally in a sense, theatrically followed by VOD, the end destination being home video. But we also have a robust sort of home video line that a testament to kind of where the company started, where we cater to people who still buy Blu-ray, who still discover films that way, who are ready to follow a curated line of films as a means to discover things in the same way that, growing up, you trust, Criterion or Vinegar Syndrome or Severin or Kino Lorber or, these sort of household names of film distribution to kind of guide you in discovering new filmmakers, new sectors or geographies of cinema, and then kind of to take you by the hand a little bit through their curation. So this idea of the sort of hyper-curated film distribution is really kind of, I think, was the governing idea or the spark to doing something like Kani for the films that we thought needed that work to be done.
I think for me, it's also like growing up between like Hong Kong and Canada. It's sort of like going, like when I'm in North America, I realize like, oh, like so many of these films I grew up with have never made it here. Like a lot of the, especially Cantonese, like Hong Kong comedies never make it overseas. Like a lot of people's idea of Hong Kong cinema is very like category 3 oriented or like horror oriented, or at least very genre heavy and
martial
arts, which is not the stuff I grew up with, not the stuff I watched on TV in the cinemas when I was here. And which led to the question of like, why not, right? And I think what we have right now with distribution is we're able to be like, there are other people who would love to see these films, and maybe they were not valued by other distributors back in the day, but like we can sort of bring them over now. And even films that were brought over now, we kind of see how they were brought over the first time around and how we're repositioning them now. The difference there and how like we want to get away from these images of exploitation and exoticism, and that's really not how I see Asian people.
Right.
I think more than anything, like distribution gives us the ability to do that without having to wait for someone else to pick up on these films.
Yeah. You were talking about like sort of like previous models, right? And that made me start thinking about something like a Miramax, who were the ones who like broke the seal with sort of like bringing Chungking Express to Western audiences and like providing people like sort of like an idea like, okay, yeah, maybe we don't have all these like action films. There are other sorts of films there, and you sort of like furthering that sort of first step into distribution.
Yeah.
Miramax also brought over Kung Fu Hustle, right? And they also cut it all up.
I mean, and Weinstein being the first, who shall not be named. But like, it's funny you mention Miramax, because I think so much of what we do comes also from an awareness of past efforts, an awareness of the canon as it exists and how we have received it, and an attempt to further it in a way that is, we recognize, very subjective and very personal, but what curation isn't, right? Like what active curation isn't very kind of, personal in its definition of what is good and what is worthwhile. And so it's funny because, that Miramax Presents, like Quentin Tarantino Presents, like Chungking Express DVD was like hugely important to me growing up. I remember the day I rented it. I remember the day I first watched Chungking Express, and I rented it because it had Tarantino's face on the cover at like age 14 or whatever it was. And from that, the takeaway from that is, for me, less the unsavory history of Miramax and what they did, but more the fact that, Chungking Express became what it became in the West because of a continued interest in making it available for people to see. And, and then Criterion picked it up. And I remember that being a big deal when it entered the collection, and that beautiful edition that they did, and the ability to see it in a much better restoration than the previous Tarantino DVD. I forget who was saying that, the history of film is really just a history of availability, of access to things. And so I think that what is kind of beautiful in what is happening now, and what we're trying to play our small part in, is making a wider range of films available for people to construct their own canons and their own film histories and their own broader, perhaps more truer versions of what a canon of film looks like beyond Europe, beyond the Americas, beyond also what has been previously deemed to be important. And so there's many overlapping reasons why this is happening now. I think COVID happened, which, gave the home video sector a bit of a boost, a bit of a lift. People spend, of course, an incredible amount of time online being presented and having access to an unknowable amount of information and cinema, both legally and illegally. And I think it creates these pathways where, you grow up with a certain canon, maybe you go to school for film, you study film a certain way, and then as your cinephilia keeps growing, you realize, well, there are all these things that are worth exploring and in our case, distributing and championing. That's kind of part of it. Yeah, we both... Before distribution, I was a festival programmer, Pearl was a sales agent. So it's also coming from the sort of intimate knowledge of the sort of dynamics of availability of what is of making things available that kind of led us to wanting to do it ourselves, basically.
Yeah, I was sort of curious. I was going to ask about your separate paths to moving into distribution, and you sort of semi-answered that already. But maybe in a sort of grander way, you were talking about, Pearl, the films that you watched as a kid growing up in Hong Kong. You were talking about Ariel. You were talking about picking up Chungking Express for the first time. What sort of birthed your love of cinema that got you into the industry in the first place? And then maybe as by extension, like what made you think that, okay, now's like a good time there's like space for us to start something in distribution, whereas theatrical and home video?
I don't know. Film has been sort of my whole adult life in a way. And I can only speak to my background programming Asian cinema, working at a festival in Montreal where I was in charge partly in charge of the Asian programming. And so working with a lot of companies, in Japan, Korea, Hong Kong, Philippines, and so on, Southeast Asia. But really loving that work and loving being at the forefront of finding new work, championing new filmmakers, keeping those on screens and those are shown. But I think what kind of came from that is a realization that, a festival run only gets a film so far. And then the films kind of fade from their sort of hyper-specialized kind of route, and then they become foreign films again, quote unquote, right? So my cinephilia is very wide-ranging, but I think I ended up in those jobs just out of a passion for Japanese cinema, for Hong Kong film, and so on, and wanting to dig deeper and be a part of the sort of cultural work that translates films from elsewhere to where I'm from, which is I'm Canadian and I'm from Montreal. And so getting involved in festivals and festival work that brings films from elsewhere to local audiences was always something that I thought was really important. That just kind of all just grew out of a general love of film and wanting to make films, share films with people, right? Just purely just share the films I like with other people.
How about you, Pearl?
I think I'm really interested in this idea of access and representation, being that how people can access films and how accessible films are. And then, of course, we started working around the time that there was like a lot of talk about like Asian American representation, the days of, I was going to say my big fat Greek wedding, but it's the Crazy Rich Asians.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
It is.
but it's like, it's a fine film, but the rhetoric around that time was like, oh, there's never been Asian representation, which isn't true because there was so much good Asian American work in the 90s, right? Like Saving Face is getting
it's too
The Wedding Banquet.
Incredible film. And then from there were so many good rom-coms that I grew up with as well. And our people are continuing to make, right? Like our film Tremble All You Want is one of the best rom-coms. It's actually one of my favorite rom-coms, but if we follow the rhetoric that like Asian people are just not represented, then where do these films fit in? And lately we've been seeing more of that, like Parasite and like now No Other Choice, like very American available films. But at the same time, there's like all of Asia has made so many incredible films, and I really want to make them accessible in a way that isn't just like otherness. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to make a silly analogy, but it's almost like third wave coffee or something like that, where I think, where I was talking about being conscious of what came before us and sort of, I think part of that awareness comes from the fact that, so the festival I was working for, the Fantasia International Film Festival in Montreal, started in 1996, if I'm getting the date right, and started as a showcase for what was then the sort of Hong Kong wave or the Asia wave that, that we now call it, right? Like the late 90s boom of Hong Kong action films, Choi-Hark, John Woo, also the moment where they go to the States and start making films in the US, and people are super interested in all of that, right? We're talking about Miramax, we're talking about that sort of translation or localization work that was happening at the time.
Right.
We're also talking about the J-horror wave, like The Ring and Ju-on and these things where all of a sudden, and Park Chan-wook coming up and Bong Joon-ho coming up, and the sort of the Korean film industry becoming the first inklings of what it will become, 20 years later with the success of something like Parasite or the American distributed films of Park Chan-wook and so on. We're still in that trajectory.
Yeah.
We're in that lineage of the West kind of waking up to Asian cinema in a way, picking and choosing what is marketable and interesting, which skews genre, skews along certain tropes. Films have to be violent. They have to be generic. We're talking Kill Bill comes along, Tarantino, as a huge champion of Shaw Brother films, of Kung Fu films, of all of that history.
In the Philippines.
And Filipino films, actually creates those bridges, which I actually look at it as a good first step. It was an introduction for me, certainly. It was exciting. But then you ask yourself, what's next? When are we going to stop spelling espresso with an X? Like when are we going to call the coffee actually what it is? Or and this is a stupid analogy I'm trying to make with third wave coffee, is that I think that we are at a sort of third, fourth wave of distributors where now we can actually get granular, and we can present Mike De Leon's work, Lino Brocka's work, do a Patrick Tam film, and call them by their name.
Yeah.
Place their films in their filmographies, talk about the filmmaking, talk about the lineages, talk about the history, get specific rather than broad and generic. And this is a crazy action movie from Hong Kong, because the previous generation did the work of presenting John Woo, Choi-Hark, the Hong Kong New Wave. But it took time. It takes time for these things to be allowed to be specific.
I was just thinking while you were saying that about Macho Dancer in particular, right? Because of course it was released by Strand back in the day, and Strand picked it up probably because of their queer leanings in their catalog. And now we get to pick it up because of Brocka.
Yeah.
And it becomes a different lineage of film.
I didn't even know that they had that movie.
It was the film that made them.
Yeah. Macho Dancer was huge for Strand releasing at the time, or so we're told. I don't want to speak for them. And I also don't want to imply that they marketed it any differently.
Yeah, but that we are able now to put it with Bona and Cain and Abel, which are very different films by genre.
And also standing on the shoulders of what the Film Foundation and Scorsese's Film Foundation and Janus Films did with Manila and the Cause of Light and Insiang. And, this building of a film canon, or this building of a film history, for example, for Filipino film outside of the Philippines, is this gradual history, right? So, maybe you start with Macho being available.
Yeah.
And the Film Foundation restores two of his classics, which brings another layer of awareness. And we are able to stand on that to do Cain and Abel and Bona and Macho soon, and hopefully more, right? And so it's this sort of, the snowballing effect that is interesting and that you kind of have to be aware of,
Right. So it sounds like to me we're sort of moving past sort of genre-based sort of categorization of these other films into something that is more maybe filmmaker based or auteur based. You are sort of taking these directors that people have some sort of familiarity with, and you're if you like this, then why don't you try this person's other films, which is great. And I think it's sort of the model that we base Deep Cut on as well. We take a popular film and be okay, we'll cover the popular film, but there are so many other films that we like that we want to recommend to you as well to watch. So it is really great to see you guys doing that in a really tangible way where people are going to the theaters to see films that you distribute theatrically or buying the discs that you guys selling. It is really great. And I really want to start getting into some titles and maybe hearing about the stories of how you guys acquire them and like hearing about your process, because I think the best way to do that is maybe just talk about a few titles. So maybe let's start off by chatting about a restored film that you did, and then maybe we can talk about in your release. Let's start with a film that we've covered. I think it was episode 70 or something like that. But this is the first Filipino filmmaker and still the only Filipino filmmaker we've covered on the podcast, Marilou Diaz-Abaya. My thinking was like, let's cover someone that people have not talked about or have heard about before we get to like a Brocka or like a Mike De Leon or Ishmael Bernal. Let's go for Marilou Diaz-Abaya because like she is great and like not really talked about that much outside of the Philippines. But when you think about Filipino cinema, especially that era, that like golden age or second golden age, you can't really like separate her from her peers and the rest of the film. So you have this sort of like 2-film showcase of her work with Karnal and Moral. And we've talked about Moral on the podcast and how incredible of a film that was, of like showing its time, but also its representation of women in that time. So maybe let's talk about, like, I want to ask which one came first for you guys? Which one? Yeah.
The FDCP arranged, I think in 2018, like a centennial of their film history in which they screened a lot of restored films in different festivals. Mm-hmm. And we saw Moral in theaters in Busan that year. It was just incredible. It was like an essay film. It's about these 4 women. And we actually spoke to Rahili, the writer of the film, last time we were in Manila. And he talked about it as basically it's just like 2 women walking down the road and just chatting. Mm. And eventually it became 4 women. And he brought in like a lot of his own history as an activist in hiding at times. And I think it's like really an incredible film that Marilou Diaz-Abaya says was widely misunderstood when it was released. It didn't get really good box office at the time, but I think looking back now, it is an incredibly beloved film, and we're like really, really honored to have worked with it.
You mentioned that retrospective in Busan that we caught, and we caught a lot of Filipino films that year that kind of made us aware of actually the incredible restoration work that was happening in the Philippines. I mean, since
2011, 10?
Yeah, I want to say 2012 or so, maybe a bit before.
That's sort of like non-existent anymore because of the ABS-CBN shutdown or something
that's
like that?
very complicated. Not
we don't have to get into it.
No, not complicated, but just very tragic history of how the department of ABS-CBN, who's a major news station in the Philippines,
they lost their license.
Essentially lost their license because to broadcast, and then shortly thereafter the restoration department had to be shuttered. But
actually the restoration department continued for a long time after, maybe 4 or 5 years.
That's true.
But it finally ended in March this year and they did a lot of work. They restored, I think, 160 or maybe even 200 films over 10, 12 years, which is like really incredible. And now I think FDCP has been trying to pick up the slack.
Yeah. So that was actually one of the initial sparks for the company, where we realized there was a lot of great and quite underseen restoration work coming out of the Philippines that wasn't being licensed to distributors in the West, the usual suspects, for reasons that are kind of understandable. I think that a lot of the restoration work that is happening in the Philippines is perhaps not funded to Western standards, if we're talking about the kind of resources available to restore film. But there's also the very real condition of the materials that exist, right? Like a lot of the restorations that we're used to in the West of European films, of American films, of Western films, the Western world, let's say, the restorations tend to have access to original camera negatives, pristine prints, archival prints, basically the whole gamut of materials that would make for a work to really look pristine once it's restored.
They have, these elements have not been ravaged by the Southeast Asian climate.
Well, exactly. Whereas in the Philippines, the climate is brutal to conserve film in, but more importantly than that, the resources to establish archives, specific histories pertaining to how rights and film materials circulate. It's all very different. And so it made it so that, we saw a lot of these restorations, and with a kind of better understanding of the available materials and the available means to restore these films, I think it kind of had the opposite effect on us, where these restorations appeared to us not as like inferior, but actually as kind of rather miraculous, that they would exist at all, that a film like Morale, which
it's on the disc, like their extent that they went to look for elements. They told us like
and the extent of the damage.
Yeah, it's incredible. Like we went into the archive of ABS-CBN, so many prints of Morale.
Wow.
All of them have like heavy vinegar syndrome.
Could you explain to us what vinegar syndrome is?
Yeah, vinegar syndrome is when, I'm not an archivist, so I don't have the technical lingo so down pat, but vinegar syndrome is essentially where the materials of celluloid start disintegrating and transforming into essentially a vinegar-like compound.
Can smell it, actually.
And it's called vinegar syndrome because the film prints, they start shrinking and they start deteriorating and they start smelling like vinegar. The celluloid itself loses integrity. And so
Morale had that issue, but it also had mold. And so you can see it in the film, and actually you can see it in the cover that Koss drew for us. He tried to keep, that element of the psychedelic colors that are in the film now. And
yeah, because there's kind of nothing they could do there to fully restore the film to its original kind of color space. Some of the mold had to be accounted for. And so the color in the restored version is as close as they can get it to the original film. But there's an element of, we call it psychedelia, because you can sort of see some damage, some green and purple kind of damage still being visible, because it was as close as they could get it to kind of what still is a very beautiful, very watchable copy. But I say it was a big part of how we, the beginnings of the company, because to be frank, we were kind of nervous and a bit scared, because so much of the Blu-ray sector, so much of the restoration sector is so obsessed with perfection and is so obsessed with these technicalities of, it's a perfect 4K scan of a perfectly preserved original camera negative, and the best it will ever look. Right. And as we are moving towards, 4K UHD and bigger TVs and, the usual kind of march of tech-driven home theater kind of sector, we were a bit worried of entering that space and offering what could be potentially deemed as an inferior restoration or an imperfect restoration. But we went ahead and did it anyway with the confidence and the knowledge that the availability of these films and honoring the work that was being done in the Philippines to preserve Filipino film heritage and translating that to the West was more important than any kind of gatekeeping of standards of what is a perfect restoration and what isn't. Yeah. And frankly, I think our fears were a bit unfounded, because a lot of these transfers, a lot of these restorations have been greeted with a lot of generosity and a lot of interest in the fact that these are finally available to a wider audience to see. Yeah. And I say available, ABS-CBN did a great job of, for example, making these films available at events, on television, on iTunes, for example. But there is a thing that happens when you give a film a new face, a new poster, a new presentation, a bit of a marketing push, a contextualization that makes the film kind of just penetrate a wider cinephilic sort of consciousness, right? We see it all the time, whether it's Criterion announcing a new movie or a distributor announcing a new release and a new poster. All of a sudden, it's like it becomes known, in our corner of cinephilia, right?
Like films that were not really on those people's radars in the first place, right? Even though they were available in another side of the world.
Yes, exactly.
And I think ABS-CBN is available in North America. And actually, there are Filipino-American TV channels. They have multiple channels, which these films are playing on. And they have iTunes. And so those are not films that are not accessible. Right. What they are is they're not in the consciousness of a cinephile. They are for the Lolas at home.
Yes.
But like for us, it's really hard to bridge like that diaspora and the cinephiles. And that's something that I really want to work on, quite honestly.
That's incredible. And I want to take a moment sort of like to check myself, because I do remember recording our Marilou's Diaz-Abaya episodes and being like, why are the transfers like, why do the restorations look so poor and look so not up to par? And it's just like me sort of like having the luxury and the pleasure of like, I don't know, experiencing like an Edward Yang 4K restoration that looks so good. And then sort of like going, like diving into this Filipino cinema and seeing stuff that maybe didn't match my prior sort of like benchmarks for what a restoration does look like, but hearing about sort of the state of what the prints were in and stuff like that, I do need to be more like open-minded. So if you listen back to those episodes, please forgive me for
and I guess like, it's a good opportunity to just talk about a little bit about archiving in the Philippines, if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course.
So I just like, it makes me think of like in Mike De Leon's book Last Look Back, he writes about how they knew that black and white film did eventually deteriorate, but they thought color film did not. And so they did not take any effort to preserve it.
Okay.
And so Mike De Leon, his grandmother ran LVN, which was one of the big studios in the Philippines. And so under his care and his sister's care, they built the LVN archives, which was set to work archiving a lot of their older films that they made. And so that's why we were able to put out like Miss Philippines, which is a film from 1947. And it's because of the work he did in the 90s of telecine that film, which, is now lost on film. And so LVN did that, but the other majors did not.
I see.
And so a lot of films from that era are lost. Jerry De Leon's films are lost, and it's a real tragedy.
Yeah.
And then from there, in Morale's case in particular, like the color is really interesting to talk about because the restoration was done at Retrovada. And then when it came back from Retrovada, and you can talk to Leo Katibag for more information on this, but basically he's like, these are not the colors of the Philippines.
Okay.
And so they went in and they had Rocky Maxino, I think, go in and touch up the color. And it actually made it, we saw the different versions, and it actually made it, the greens like almost more pronounced, like the mold even more pronounced, but it was a lot more colorful, right? And so it's like, what exactly is the way a film should look?
Yeah, what are the standards? What are the exact, who makes the call? But yeah, at the end of the day, we were less interested in sort of being arbiters of what those standards are than to just put the work in making these filmmakers and these films known.
Yeah, that's the important part, right? It's not like how great they look. It's like people are seeing these films.
And we're also careful, we put explanatory notices and disclaimers, explaining these things. Our booklets are full of context as to why things look a certain way. Being able then to do something like Bona perfectly was such a satisfaction because
those elements were kept in France.
Yeah.
I just want to mention, Marilou Diaz-Abaya, some of her films are lost.
Yeah.
Like that's crazy. And she only worked in the 80s.
I mean, some of Brocka's films are lost.
But she didn't make so many.
Sure. Or presumed lost, which, is a great segue into Bona, because up until quite recently, the film was thought lost, and then the elements were found in France. And then, and I think these two films are great to talk about because Bona has, like, people know about the film, of course, because of Nora Nor. But Morale has been a film that has been on TV all the time in the Philippines. A lot of people have seen it. But for 40 years, Bona was missing from the Filipino psyche almost, right? And so this is a film that is owned by Nora Honor and now her estate. And it was like just such a privilege to work on it and to bring it back into circulation. And hopefully more so moving forward.
Yeah. I'm curious about your relationship with the sort of like restoration process of both of these films, because you said that you had seen this already like screened or already like scanned into a restoration of sorts. And Bona, to my knowledge, you guys were quite involved pre sort of that process of doing that. So what did that look like for you guys, and how did this film come to you?
Yeah, so with Morale, we just bought it from ABS-CBN straight up. We're not involved in the restoration at all. For Bona, we were working with JB Capino. Not necessarily working with. He's always been a great advisor and a great friend.
Wrote the booklet for Kane and Abel. I mean, wrote the book on Brocka.
Yeah, martial law
melodrama, which is an amazing resource for.
We have 2 copies.
For a wealth of frankly, this is kind of the North Star too, because it's a wealth of information on a number of Brocka films that are not easily available, that haven't been restored or are not in circulation so much. He's an academic. His research is really impeccable, so he was able to write up these films that we're still discovering, right, to this day. Reading the book, thinking, what to do next? How can we keep working on Brocka? And I think after doing Kane and Abel, keeping in touch with him, I'm a bit hazy about exactly the order of the events, but basically it became kind of known that Bona was an option, that the elements had been found, and that we could reconcile.
More precisely, what had happened is that there were 2 open secrets, right? The first open secret was in the Philippines, that Nora owned the film. The second open secret in France was that the elements were left at a certain lab.
Oh, wow.
And the 2 open secrets just never came together.
Yeah.
And JB made that happen. Then through our work with Vincent at Carlota, he was the one who was able to track down the print at a lab that he works with very closely. It was LTC, which is now Cité de Mémoire, who did the restoration.
Yeah.
And so for us, we were not in the room with the restoration, but we, facilitated it across. But a lot of that credit also goes to Carlota, who did a lot of the work.
Yeah. I'm sure it must feel you're sort of an archaeologist that's sort of uncovering a dinosaur or something.
Yeah.
I really love it.
It is the most exciting part of the job. And I think that for us as a very young company, it was such a learning experience and such a great experience. For example, work with Carlota in France, for whom, they've done so many of these, for them, it's kind of the usual. They
know exactly what to do.
Yeah, the usual kind of workflow. I mean, they also license a lot of existing restorations, like any company does.
Yeah.
But to bring a project from non-existence, I remember being home and watching a VHS rip of Bona with hard-coded French subtitles that was probably a pirated copy of a screener, festival screener for Cannes in 1981.
Oh my God.
Watching a file of that to then cut 3 years later to a pristine 4K restoration. That is truly the most satisfying kind of process. And yeah, I mean, it is exactly that. I think it's being an archaeologist of film and being able to kind of connect the right people to the right rights, to the right people, the right elements, to the right, and getting that going with the support of Carlota, of course, without whom we couldn't have done it. It was just, an amazing experience. And perhaps the film in our catalog that we can sort of really claim as something that we've initiated and that wouldn't have happened without us.
Yeah. I talk about seeing Bona on the big screen with my mom at HKIFF last year this year, or I forgot what year it was, but it was really a truly magical experience. And it was also very emotional because that was the week that Nora passed away as well. So yeah, big deal. And if you haven't seen Bona, it is an incredible movie. And also the restoration looks beautiful.
Is your mom a Noranian?
Not necessarily. She's not she's not a diehard, but yeah, she dabbled.
She knew of.
Yeah, she knew of. And it was interesting because you were right. She had never seen Bona before, and it was not really in the conversation. Whereas when we watched Morale together, she was like, "Oh yeah, we Morale has been playing on TV for a while."
Yeah, I'm sure Morale is our Tokyo Raiders. You sit down for dim sum at a random restaurant. It's playing on Tuesday, and you're
TV,
this again?
Yeah.
Well, I don't. Maybe not that extent, but something. Hopefully something like that.
Yeah, why do they play Tokyo Raiders all the time?
I don't know. Yeah, let's move to another Filipino film. Unfortunately, we lost another great Filipino film giant this year with Mike De Leon and his film Kisapmata, which I regard as one of the greatest Filipino films of all time.
It's one of the greatest films of all time.
I think so. And it's not us saying that. I think the film came to us purely, truly on the back of its reputation. It's often cited as one of the greatest Filipino films. So, of course, the moment you start interesting yourself or being interested in Filipino film history and Filipino cinema, that's one of the top 3 titles that comes up, top 5, top 3. And so we just watched it that way from the restoration that Mike himself had commissioned. And, that's the beauty of Mike, is that he knew, we were talking about the LVN archives earlier, like he knew to take care of his own film heritage. He knew to restore his own films. He knew to make that happen. And so we are now able to see all of his films, or almost all of his films, in really good conditions. I'm thinking of E-Team, I'm thinking of Kisapmata, I'm thinking of Batch 81. We were talking about ABS-CBN earlier. They restored some of the goofier ones, I want to say. Will Your Heart Beat Faster? And
Moments in a Stolen Dream.
Moments in a Stolen Dream, We're really lucky to have access to Mike's work in this way. And so for Kisapmata was a bit more straightforward, where working with Carlota on Bona, Carlota in France having handled some of the rights to Mike's films and also put out a beautiful, complete box set of his work a few years ago. We weren't quite in a position to do that, to assemble all of the films and put out such a box. But we were still committed to working on Mike's films. And so we started with Will Your Heart Beat Faster, Sakit Pelicula, the restoration arm of ABS-CBN, restored, and then moved on to Kisapmata, which was a very straightforward licensing situation, but all the same, such a masterpiece. It felt really special to be able to do it as a standalone release in this way.
I'm looking at it right now, and it's signed. I'm just realizing that I need to really handle this with a lot of care.
Yeah, I gave one away earlier this year, and Ariel was very upset. That was before Mike passed. I was like, we could get more, but no.
Yeah. Mike is truly, his reputation precedes him, but I think he was the truly the last living master of Filipino cinema. Someone who came from a lot of privilege, of course, but who was able to barter that privilege into, I think, a very singular and uncompromising and politically driven body of work that has really no peers in the Filipino film history, just because of the complete independence that he was able to operate under and the complete sort of uncompromising way that he was able to approach things. Like he never had to make outwardly commercial films to survive. He never had to.
He did try.
Well,
he did make more commercial films.
Of course, but he never had to sort of, it's a very succinct, compact filmography of don't quote me on this, but about eight films, 8 to 10 films. And
even Lav started on Pito Pitos, right?
Exactly. And even you think of someone who like Lav, who started at Regal making quick 80-minute action films, Pito Pito films, sexy films. And so you look at Mike De Leon's career, and it's this truly auteur-driven body of work that Kubrickian in that way almost, he's he's in a league of his own.
And how do you think of a filmmaker who can make Will Your Heart Beat Faster and Kisapmata?
Well, that's the thing. He was interested in many genres and many registers, but I think what sort of unifies the body of work is always this underlying critical edge, staunch sort of anti-authoritarianism, this staunch kind of critique of the Marcos regime, critique of whether it's religion or autocracy in the Philippines. It's baked into all of the films. Certain colonial dynamics that he makes fun of in Will Your Heart Beat Faster. His work is so beautifully politically charged, no matter if he's doing a rom-com, a comedy, or, Kisapmata, which is horror, disguised as true crime, disguised as a family drama. a horror film dressed in a soap opera, right? It's sort of how one can look at it. And then, I mean, it's a truly special film, and I would encourage anybody interested in Filipino film to really, it's a great place to start, actually. Yeah.
If it is playing in a big screen near you, I suggest you catch it. I've only seen it on a computer screen. So.
I suggest that you go grab your time machine and go back in time and then go see the film in a big screen. Yeah, it really is incredible. And Mike has, between going to the Philippines, like Mike and also Teddy Ko were two incredible resources for us. Both of them were like walking history books, and both of them promised me they would live for a long time. And now, they're gone. And what we have is we've lost all that history. We've all lost all that knowledge, right? Like, actually working on Kagabakaba, we were working on Miss Philippines, which is a 1947 film, like I mentioned, that Mike managed to sort of save. And we were looking at photos from that era, and the two of them could have been like, this is this actor, this actor, this actor. These are like LVN stable actors who's nobody's seen since the 60s.
Yeah.
But like these people knew, right? Like Mike grew up there watching these people film. Teddy tracked the history as an archivist, and so much of this hasn't been written down.
Yeah. And that's why I feel like the work that you guys do, specifically with regards to Philippine cinema, is so important. I'm not even sure that these are getting like home video releases in the Philippines themselves, right? Like that sort of has the amount of care that you guys are...
had DVDs, but there is no home video market. Actually, we were in the Philippines and I tried to buy pirated things, and you couldn't even find, like, they were like, oh, you can get a USB full of movies, and I couldn't even find that anymore. Like, you can't even find the...
Yeah, I mean, it's a very complicated subject because in some ways, I really don't want to diminish the work that, Filipino film writers and historians and people like Leo Katigbak at ABS-CBN were doing to preserve their own film heritage. But, they're also confronted to a very real lack of resources, but also the lack of a market, right? So much of Filipino media consumption has so aggressively moved online, right? It's social media driven. It is streaming driven. People watch films for free on YouTube. Yeah. Cinemas are closing or closed or non-existent, let alone art house theaters, repertory theaters, which are practically non-existent.
There's Cinepop.
There are a lot of film production companies, but there are very few film distribution companies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the problems are systemic. How do you put out a film if the market itself has devalued film to that extent? We are routinely asked to put Bona up for free on YouTube, to put it up for free on Facebook, to put it up for free on the internet. I think there is a sort of misunderstanding of the economics or a different cultural context for those economics. And so I think for us, I'm very careful with that because I don't want to diminish the work that's being done in the Philippines. I want to supplement it, and I want to also harness what is still, unfortunately, the sort of cultural dominion of the Western world in terms of cinema, of cinephilia. You as a cinephile, you are, at least you should be, acutely aware of these dynamics, where it's like, you look at the 100 best films for Sight and Sound, 80% of those are Janus Criterion movies.
Yeah, they are.
They're Eureka, they're BFI movies, they are the Western canon. So I'm not going to spend my time condemning that. I'm going to try to harness that power to shine light on the films that I think are interesting from other parts of the world. And people are doing that for, films from the African continent, from films from the Middle East. I think this is not just us. It's like there is a kind of an increased awareness of these dynamics, of these inequities, and wanting to kind of fix them or repair them kind of one film at a time. I think is something that a lot of curators and distributors, including, Criterion and including big players, are kind of trying to do, and then on the other, there's another kind of corner of that where people are trying to do that also for maybe disreputable or unsavory genres, right? Whether we're horror, pornography, independent film, like independently made films, shot on video, regional filmmaking. There's all that happening too.
Yeah.
I'm talking about things regionally and geographically, but I think it's like this awareness of these dynamics is a lot of what informs our decisions
and to go back to your first question about what a distributor is, it's like all this work has happened in the Philippines, and our only job is to bring it over. It's really important to understand that we are not going in and like doing anything compared to the work that is actually being done there. The incredible work that ABS-CBN did, that Leo Kachibag did with that, and then that FECP is like doing right now.
Yeah.
That like FBJ Studios is doing for FBJ Films. Like the work is happening in the Philippines, and the reason why the Filipino films are getting out is because there's so much goodwill in the Philippines.
Yeah. And that also like sort of speaks to the positives of you guys being physically based here in Hong Kong as sort of like a go-between between Asia, where you are sourcing a lot of the films and meeting with these people who are doing the on-the-grounds work, and like going over to the US and Canada and like bringing them to audiences over there that want these films.
Yeah, exactly. We're like 90 minutes from Manila.
Yeah.
And I think it's really good to go there and hear what people like.
Yeah.
To be absolutely honest, we really love Morel. We did not love Karnal the first time we saw it. But people did. Everywhere we went, they were like, I love Karnal. I love Karnal. And we're like, that makes sense.
Yeah. It's interesting because, in a way, is it essential for us to be here, right? It's a question that I ask myself. There are far more successful and bigger distributors who are currently acquiring and releasing Hong Kong films and Asian films, by the truckload and making those available to a huge audience.
And they've never
well, that's not what I was going to say. I'm just saying, you don't have to be here to successfully release Asian cinema. But I like to think that it gives us a particular consciousness and a particular awareness and a particular kind of taste to our curation that we wouldn't otherwise have.
Yeah.
If we had to rely purely on a licensing department through email or a certain angle on what is good and so on. And of course you can always have outside consultants and experts and people working for you making really great informed decisions. Distributors do have that, and great decisions are being made. I don't want to knock anybody's work. I'm just saying at our scale, which is extremely small, I think it benefits us to sort of be on the ground and have an ear to the ground and have our friends and our not to say network, but like friends and colleagues who can kind of tip us to a different side or a different entry point to Asian cinema.
Like we get to talk to our directors a lot more because, we try to go to Manila, we try to go to Tokyo like every year. Of course, we're here.
Yeah.
And, we have our ear also on independent Chinese cinema. And the other thing is like, not only are we, like I said, 90 minutes from Manila, we're also like $150 away. Which really makes a difference between like coming to Asia for 2 weeks. It's like, this is the conversation we have with ourselves. Like, what would happen if we moved to North America?
Right.
Yeah. What if we move back?
And it's so important that you have built up these really personal relationships with filmmakers and people working with the material themselves, because you feel like you're really doing justice to them when you are putting together a physical release for something. Like I can tell from the covers to the discs themselves and the special features that are inside of them, there's so much effort and care that you guys put into every release. And I think maybe that has to do with you knowing these people that worked on them, like personally.
Thank you for saying that. But
Thank you for saying that. Yeah,
I think the release to talk about for that is Shari.
We can segue into Shari. I'll just say, I think this is a line I got from our good friend Joe Yannick, who also runs a great distribution company called Yellow Veil Pictures. At some point we were talking, and I think he just said to me offhandedly, I just want to work with good people. I just want to work with friends. I just want to work with good people. I just want to work with people who want to work with us. And I think that, I just kind of took that and I don't know that it meant so much, but I think the more that we do this and the more that you go out there and you try to license films and you try to work with people, I think there's just this thing that's very naturally happens where you will work with people where the energy is reciprocal. You will work with people who want to work with you. You will kind of gravitate towards these more personal relationships because if nothing else, it's not about money. It's not about ease of access or anything like that. It is about the sort of the energy you put in and you wanting to feel like that energy is rewarded or that, you want it to feel good because you're spending your time doing this.
Yeah.
Oftentimes for not that much money and it's a lot of time and it's a lot of our lives. And so part of that is trying to make it an adventure for ourselves, which, was a huge part of maybe the film we're going to talk about next with Shari, which is by any metric of any business, not a film you should release. Right. But a film that we felt so strongly about.
We released it anyway.
We felt so strongly about it and wanting to do it because of her personal connection to it. And that kind of makes it not effortless, but it makes it happen,
Yeah, we basically said to Nao, like, hey, let's go to Shari. And she's like, let's do it. And next thing we knew, we had booked tickets and yeah, it was incredible. We flew up to Shari from Sapporo. And then we spent 3-4 days just in Shari, went snowshoeing. We met a lot of the people, a lot of the participants of the film and really got to know the area, the city, yeah, it was incredible to be there.
Yeah.
And then we slowly took the train back down to Sapporo, going through Hokkaido and just realizing how unique Shari is.
Wow.
Or how special it is because the moment you leave it, the next city you went to was Kushiro. And already the food is not as good.
Well, maybe we should present the film a little bit.
Let's introduce this film. So this is a new release. So this is the first new release we're talking about. We've been talking about restorations. And this is Nao Yoshigai's Shari, which is, I don't know, hard for me to say, it is sort of a semi-doc. I was saying is maybe some sort of performance art with her being in this sort of suit and portrait of this town called Shari up in Hokkaido in Japan. And I found it to be so unique of a picture and maybe something, that you guys really went out on a limb to fight for and present to a wider audience. So could you maybe tell me about how this film or filmmaker came to you and why you guys chose to put it out?
Yeah, I mean, Nao Yoshigai is a filmmaker whom I had known a little bit about through her short film work being exhibited at festivals. One of her shorts went to the Directors Fortnight in Cannes, and I mean, I discovered her film that way. So it's not like I was there from ground zero up, but basically got in touch, and at the time I was programming for Fantasia, so I did organize a retrospective of her work in Montreal. It was 4 mid-length short works in a program, and yeah, her work immediately kind of struck me as completely unique in the context of emergent or contemporary Japanese work, which is to say she's a choreographer, a dancer who became interested in making films, making short films that at first kind of where she has a whole set of shorts that are, she calls dance films that are more choreographed.
She says they're supposed to make you feel the way she feels when she's dancing.
Yeah, but, I think initially as she was kind of finding that, it was kind of straightforward, filmed choreography and so on. But then they became kind of something else. Yeah, films that are using the body and using dance as an idea to make you feel differently. But that also started incorporating certain documentary elements into them, place-specific documentary elements. And although she has also films that are straight-up fiction. And so I kind of followed her short work for a little while. And then when her first feature came out, Shari, I was really excited and interested in it and also ended up programming it. And it's a film that's kind of stayed on my mind for very many years. But as you say, it's a peculiar film. It's neither straightforward documentary. It's a bit of a fantasy. It's a kind of a journal film of her visiting a town and discovering it and showing us the town of Shari in northern Hokkaido. But it is also commissioned by Shari, the municipality. So it also is a sort of town promo, subverted in a way.
It's not specifically commissioned by the town.
It's in part funded and commissioned by the town. But what I'm trying to say is also part of that lineage of Japanese works that are commissioned films. You see them where filmmakers will find these sort of regional sources of funding to be able to make films. And sometimes it'll just imply shooting in a city or a municipality or something like this. And a kind of great alternative way for independent filmmakers to keep working. All of these things are kind of inconsequential when you kind of receive the film and just receive it as this beautiful sort of documentary hybrid that to us fell of a piece with what we're trying to do, which is to be very kind of like hyper specific about whatever cinema we're interested in. And in this case, for Japanese cinema, it's like we love these films that are very specific about place and that are very specific about perhaps showing you another facet of Japan that we're not used to. This is a very northern, rural, small town Japan that you don't often get to see, characters that you don't often get to see, a locale that you don't often get to see, unless you go to Hokkaido. Yeah. This is not the sprawling metropolis of Tokyo. This is not the sort of commonplace representation of Japan that you get from other works. And I think it's kind of maybe a more subtle, but it is a through line in some of our films or how we pick films. Is like, what is this doing to sort of further the understanding of a place, be it the Philippines or Japan, or, which comparatively, for example, Japan, there's no shortage of available Japanese cinema, right? Yeah.
And I think going there, we were able to learn so much more about this place. Like, for instance, there's a whole mountain museum, which feels kind of random, but it's incredible.
Yeah. Or more specifically, a mountain-themed publication called Alps or Alp that has a museum dedicated to its history. It was kind of like an editorial, kind of like, I want to say, like New Yorker style magazine that ran for
mountains
for 3 decades about specifically mountaineering.
Very Japanese, very specific.
Niche. Yeah, it's super niche.
We learned a lot about Hokkaido history as well, like the forced relocation of Ainu, and also the forced settlement of
Hokkaido.
Yeah, of Hokkaido. Like entire half towns were moved from the south into Hokkaido, and we were able to pick up a book on women's oral history and just how hard it was. Yeah. And to see how that shaped the landscape. And you can see the scars on the land. They have replanting projects that are wrong. You see this, the trees are planted straight and it makes no sense, right? But
it's very common, but it's jarring to look at.
Yeah.
I think with the physical edition of the film, it was really us harnessing the beauty of a Blu-ray edition, what you can do with it editorially, which is to say, we shot special features while in Shari. We shot interviews while in Shari. We really made it this kind of bespoke, personalized package, perhaps more so than a lot of our other releases, because we kind of lived it. Yeah. Produced it ourselves, providing background for the town and the project and the booklet, including some of our shorts on the set, and really, hoping that it would kind of be this kind of complete introduction to this, frankly, unknown movie. And of course, you put that out in the world and it does the numbers that it does. It doesn't have the name recognition of other things that we may have put out or that people put out, but it felt so good to do it. And these things you do, and you balance out with other more successful discs and releases, and you do for the love of the...
And these are the films that we get to make the call on, right? And this is what it means to us to run our own...
Yeah, and you guys have the luxury to be like, yes, I will take this on, and I will put in this effort to travel and help build out this physical release for this film.
And exactly what we were saying about working with people who want to work with us. Now came along, and because we don't drive. Now drove us around, and it was... Yeah. And you can also see the town loved her. Everywhere we went, people love her. And so when you talk about documentary, it's about perspective, and it's about whose story it is and who has a right to tell it. And
it was a great experience. And luxurious is a good word. Maybe not luxurious in terms of riches, but luxurious in terms of life experience for sure.
Yeah. I suggest you guys pick up this physical copy. It is really beautiful. I was looking through the booklet earlier, and there's some great photos there. And the movie is also really one of a kind. So listeners, if you're interested, it's Shari. Okay, let's move on to maybe a few others. We are in Hong Kong right now, so I'm looking at maybe a Hong Kong film that we have right here. This is a Patrick Tam film starring a very young Tony Leung, and a few other characters or actors, but I always gravitate towards Tony Leung because who cannot, right? Patrick Tam is a filmmaker that I guess I've had I don't know, a contentious relationship with. I'm not like the biggest Nomad fan, but when I found this and I found Love Massacre, which is coming out somewhere in the next year or so, I was really like taken aback by this kind of filmmaking. And you are right in saying that he is someone that past the Wong Kar-wai, past the John Woos and the Johnny Toes and the Ann Hui's, maybe even, like, you don't really like talk or hear about Patrick Tam. So maybe tell me about this film and your story with this film.
Yeah, I mean, if we accept that we're kind of doing, Asian Cinema 103 or something, then it's like we felt that, and this is something, I mean, I'm not saying this is something that I think anyone that has a passing interest in Hong Kong cinema will tell you, is that I do feel that Patrick Tam is a little bit underrated, I think, as one of Hong Kong's great filmmakers. And I think there are very obvious, simple reasons for this. Much like Mike de Leon, his body of work is this very auteur-driven, auteur-defined kind of set amount of films that are, were not these huge successful commercial films, that were not necessarily that he didn't make 40 films like Choi Hark or 25 or 30 like John Woo, and maybe not as flashy or something like Wong Kar-wai. But the thing is, you encounter Patrick Tam's film and you realize just how vital he is to the DNA of all of that.
Yeah.
To the DNA of the Hong Kong New Wave, to what became Wong Kar-wai, which is the most emblematic filmmaker in Hong Kong, perhaps to this day. And so all these things for us felt like, Patrick Tam is, in a way, the godfather of all this artful Hong Kong art house cinema that we know and that we love, and yet his name is not spoken out loud so often. And for us, My Heart Is That Eternal Rose felt like the perfect entry point, and a film that we could work on, but also perhaps the most emblematic of this sort of connective tissue that I'm trying to get at, right? Which is, here's a film that comes out in 1989, partly shot by a very young Christopher Doyle, in a way that is, to me, felt like it bridged this sort of art house tradition that would peak with Wong Kar-wai with the sort of commercial imperatives of a Hong Kong cinema, which is to say triad films, heroic bloodshed films, the more kind of generic conventions of Hong Kong cinema. And so Patrick Tam, as someone who always kind of, having been a screenwriter before, having written commercial films, with Wong Kar-wai, having edited some of Wong Kar-wai's films, he's always kind of in between these two worlds. And My Heart Is That Eternal Rose to us felt like this sort of perfect collision, and therefore this perfect introduction to just how important he is to Hong Kong cinema. And so, let alone the fact that it's a tremendous film just to sit back and watch. Yeah. But I think as someone who, grew up watching Wong Kar-wai's films on the one hand, and Choi Hark, John Woo, Ann Hui, Wu Sha films, heroic bloodshed films, all of this, encountering Patrick Tam was just, this connective link, this missing link that I didn't know I needed and I didn't know existed. And it kind of opened up, for me, a broader understanding of what the Hong Kong New Wave was and what the commercial cinema of the 70s into the 80s into the 90s was, and how you could, and how people like Patrick Tam chose to navigate that a little bit more confrontationally or a little bit more uneasily. I don't think he is someone who thrived in that commercial environment. I think he's someone who tried to do it on his own terms. And as a result, maybe didn't get to do as many films as he should have or wanted to. But this is also how you end up with...
That I would have wanted him to.
That I would have wanted him to. But I think that's how you end up with kind of these timeless curiosities and these timelessly singular films such as My Heart, Nomad, Love Massacre, The Final Victory, the list goes on, right?
And I'm really interested actually in the pre-times, which is the time they were all making TV. And so this edition includes 3 episodes of TV.
Oh, wow.
Which I am really happy about. It really took a long time to license, to like put together. And I think it's like really incredible to have them. So that's 2 episodes of CID. So that's the series that TVB made. It's sort of like what is it called when they're not joined? Like every episode is kind of different.
Oh, it's an anthology series.
It's an anthology series with the same characters, these 4 cops basically, and it was made with the police department at the time.
Okay,
right after their like huge corruption scandal that resulted in the formation of the ICAC. Yeah, beautiful history. And it's just really incredible, and it's because of that era of TV filmmaking, where they were able to go to these police stations and access all these files and talk to cops, that we end up with the filmographies that came out of it after, right? Like Alex Chung's Man on the Brink, and a lot of like Choi Hark films, like all these sort of like cop films came out of that era of exploration in TV, when they were given, cameras to just take around town because there was no studio space. And it really was just incredible work. And you can see Patrick Tam trying things in these TV episodes with a super young Simon Yam.
Like, oh, wow, okay.
Yeah, like he looks so...
I feel like I've only seen him like post 40 years old.
No, he's like, I don't know how old. He looks 19, to be honest. Like, he's so young. Yeah, it's like an incredible side of Hong Kong that you don't really get to see otherwise, yeah.
You've talked a lot in depth about like sort of like the materials that you had access to with regards to Filipino cinema. I was a little curious about like maybe for this film with My Heart Is That Eternal Rose, what was the condition of the digital copy that you guys had? And
with My Heart Is That Eternal Rose, the restoration was done by the production company Maya, who owned the film. And the problem actually is that it's restored in the wrong aspect ratio. And when we went back to them and we're like, hey, this is the wrong aspect ratio, they just chopped it further, which is like really not great.
Indicative
of the kind of work that's happening, right? Which is like there is no standard. Maya is actually great because they actually have a restoration department. They have a great scanner, an RA 4K scanner. And so they've done that work for a lot of their films, right? They recently restored PTU. Of course, from them, we've got Man on the Brink, Spacked Out, all done at Maya. And also Bullets Over Summer. And so they are actually a studio they're the only studio in Hong Kong that is able to do that in-house. And then you have like Fortune Star, who's commissioning restorations very carefully of their own work, although they don't like grain. And then you have, for instance, who else is doing, like Celestial digitized a lot of their films like in 2010, which is all the Shaw films. And then you have the Hong Kong Film Archive. I'm just leaving it at that.
So there was a little bit of a back and forth between you and Maya when you were sort of discussing.
But it's very limited because it was a complete restoration. And so we are doing our very first restoration right now, commissioning. We are commissioning the restoration of My Name Ain't Susie, which is an Angie Chen film. We've put out her first film, Maybe It's Love, and My Name Ain't Susie is her second film.
Our very first restoration in Hong Kong.
Which is really smooth because it's a Celestial-owned Shaw film. They had the OCN. We scanned it at Retrovada, and it's being restored right now in Japan at Coop. And we're really excited to see how it turns out. Angie Chen has been a good friend, I think, for like the last 8 to 10 years. And so it's really a pleasure to work on her films. And so that's Anthony Wong's very first film ever.
Oh, wow.
And it has Pat Ha, it has Dini Yip. Yeah, it's going to be a great film, which may be out soon in February.
Be on the lookout for that.
Yeah, so actually through Vinegar Syndrome, I have facilitated the restoration of a great number of Hong Kong films. And so it's been really easy because actually the OCNs are not that bad and available.
What are OCNs for, including me, someone who's like sort of
it's the original camera negative, so it's the film that was inside the camera that was shot at the time, which means it's
before it's being developed.
Before it was developed. So it's the best master. It is, yeah.
Okay.
And so that is normally what you would want if you're restoring a film.
Okay. I feel like I've been like spoiled for choice and I've been like picking things that I like, but are there any titles that you guys want to highlight to our listeners? Do you want me to pass these to you? Yeah. Do a little like quick fire round of introducing films to listeners, including a few that I really love here. Yeah.
Yeah, there's something that we've been working on in sort of, mid 2025 onwards, which has been a sort of, kind of wanting to explore the history of independently made Japanese cinema of the late 70s or mid to late, mid 70s to sort of early 80s. What, is often referred to as jishu eiga, or autonomous film, or independently made film. And this was sort of a bit of a small movement that sort of came out of a kind of sort of punk desire to kind of make films on your own as the studio system was sort of dwindling, and filmmakers weren't finding the opportunities or the apprenticeship structure that used to exist in the Japanese film industry, and kind of went out on their own and made films on their own. And out of that comes a wealth of, 8mm films that were, independently produced and made that gave us, Shinya Tsukamoto or Sogo Ishii or Masashi Yamamoto, who we've been working on. But there was a sort of bit of a conjecture in kind of some of the films that we were licensing, where both on the repertory end, we started working on films such as Isao Fujisawa's Bye Bye Love, which is 1974, sort of queer road movie, early trans film or trans-ish film in Japan that's really this super influential, completely underseen exemplar of a jishu eiga film, a completely independent film, making kind of great strides in queer representation, queer themes in Japanese cinema, kind of just right after also, Funeral Parade of Roses, which is very well known. Yeah. This one being a bit more of like a caper in the style of Pierrot le Fou or Bonnie and Clyde, very much inspired by those, but doing things in its own sort of, countercultural, very 70s Japanese way. Which, that opened the door to a film by Akihiro Suzuki called Looking for an Angel, which was a gay porno or gay pink film, or rather a art film that was made for the gay pink circuit, in that circuitous way, right, of getting financing where you can, and taking the pink money and making your art film with it, even if that means that it'll just get shown in pink cinemas. And so those two films came to us through Akihiro Suzuki, who's a curator and a filmmaker. So he made Looking for an Angel, and he also spearheaded the restoration of Bye Bye Love. And all of that kind of, put us in a kind of jishu eiga mood, of working on Bye Bye Love, working on Looking for an Angel, getting our latest film in the Masashi Yamamoto body of work ready, which is Carnival in the Night, which is his...
Terrorism.
And Saint Terrorism. So Saint Terrorism is his 8mm debut, and Carnival in the Night is his debut, proper theatrical debut. The film went to the Berlinale and kind of launched his career in this way.
And of course, we've also put out What's Up Connection by him. And
Robinson's Garden. And so I don't know, this is sort of this kind of vibe that we've been in, and wasn't planned, but connected to some of the contemporary films that we are releasing. I'm getting past, future, and present mixed up here.
Okay, podcast forever.
But basically, some of the things that attracted us to Yoko Yamanaka's work as early as Amiko, which she released in 2017.
Which we saw in Berlin that year.
We saw in Berlin in 2018. Is this the PF Film Festival selected independent film? PF Film Festival, for people unaware, is this hugely influential festival for independent Japanese cinema. Takes place every year in September. Goes as far as this history of jishu eiga that I'm talking about, really launched that movement in some sense, and continue to defend independently made Japanese film. And of course, in 2017 and 18, nowadays, jishu eiga doesn't look like scrappy punk 16mm, 8mm made films from that generation. It looks very different, but that spirit of sort of confrontation, invention.
Amiko is very much that,
Amiko is super punk at heart, but I'm saying it's not shot on 16mm, it's shot digitally, but it has that spirit. And so that spirit for us just kind of has sort of carried us over in a sort of selection of Japanese films in a way that I hope people pick up on. I'm bringing it up because I've been thinking about this. I haven't verbalized it, but I do want people to pick up on it. And that brings us to Desert of Namibia, which we released this year, 2025 in May, picked up in Cannes of 2024. It's Yoko Yamanaka's second film, obviously made at a vastly different scale than Amiko, but really appeared to us as this complete breath of fresh air in terms of how it sort of tackles being a young woman in Tokyo, being a young woman in Japan, which for me, if I had to boil it down, has become sort of Yamanaka's kind of foremost preoccupation, is to sort of confront and redefine or simply just define a sort of experience of being a young girl and then a young woman in Tokyo, and trying to put on screen representations of that feel more, by virtue of being more accurate to her experience and being more accurate to her way of seeing the world, end up being completely subversive, in fact, like completely confrontational, completely subversive of a sort of status quo that is largely unaddressed and sort of unacknowledged in Japanese cinema,
And the response to the film has been really polarizing. Is that the word?
I'm quite polarized on the film as well. But like, I would suggest that people catch it because it is this portrayal of a protagonist that is so hard to read or it's hard to sort of like figure out what's on her mind. It's something you rarely see in this sort of like coming out of age cinema, and you don't like have this sort of like someone that's really holding you at a distance. And I found that to be really fascinating about Desert of Namibia.
Yeah, and I think Yoko was the one who said it. This was that the response in Japan has been like a mirror of the person giving the review. And we find that to be true also in the US. Like a lot of people mistake how likable a character Kana is with how likable the film is, and really reveal themselves like a little bit misogynistic, or and in these ways the film has been like really interesting to engage with.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those films, and I think it's 100% what attracted us to it is I think it's one of those films that, it's a difficult film, it's a confrontational film, which isn't to say that it's, sloppily made or imprecise or anything. I think, that goes hand in hand with a complete sort of assurance, like a complete sort of precise mise en scène and a very precise actor's direction and a very precise point of view that seems to me very carefully thought out and produced in terms of tone and affect. And
it was like not made with a great budget either. It was shot over 10 days. It's really...
I mean, it is a Japanese film of a certain scale, but it looks beautiful. And I think it does a lot with its cast and locations and
what they had access to.
And the thing is, to me, who, spends an inordinate amount of time watching Japanese film and looking for Japanese filmmakers and looking for new work, it just really immediately just struck me as something I had never seen. And that's extremely rare in any given filmmaker's work, and first feature, second feature. And it's so something that we're really proud of kind of being able to carry forward, And I think time will tell if people catch up to it. But I do think, if I can say so humbly, that we're ahead of the curve on these.
I mean, it was like we picked it out of, we were going to pick it anyway because we love Yoko's work. But we picked it out of Kanzen that year, which was an incredible year at Kanzen. Like every single film they had that year was like just incredible.
That was a good year, yeah. Depending on who you ask. It was not the consensus, but yeah.
Any other titles that you guys want to highlight? I'm sure we're going to continue this conversation, especially with this maybe Lav Diaz thing that I might be cooking up next year with your release of Batang West Side. We'll definitely maybe have you guys back on to chat about
more about Batang. Batang has been a great film to work on because I wasn't able to talk about this earlier, but one thing I love about producing Blu-rays is being able to talk to people. And so it was like really incredible because there's so much goodwill around Batang, even though it sounded incredibly difficult to make. Like all these people crammed in one house in New Jersey, and it's just such a beautiful epic and really worth watching, and the hours really fly right by. And so we were really lucky. We got to talk with Joel Torre. We got to talk with Art Acuna, who is Acuna. We got to talk with Gloria Diaz, the first Miss Philippines who became Miss Universe.
Wow.
Incredible. Priscilla Almeida, who is now running, I think, for office in the Philippines. And so just to see also these people like 20 years on has been really cool. And of course, Lav himself. Yeah. And also we were able to include the writing of Alexis Joseki, who is a critic, a Filipino critic who passed away really young.
Wow.
Murdered, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, but that is something that Deep Cut listeners can be looking out for. I am making it my mission this year of 2026, to bring Lav Diaz to your ears, especially after the success or the continued success, hopefully by February, great success of Magellan.
The Oscar-winning Magellan.
Yes, let's see it now.
Best Picture, Magellan. Let's do it.
We're campaigning. Speaking of the future, are there any like desires of you guys of like what you guys want to like move on to post what you guys have on your slate right now? Any dreams you have?
I mean, for me, the great whale would be, I mean, there's so many. Do you want to go first?
I'm not giving anybody free ideas. I mean,
okay.
I'm kidding. I mean, there are big. I think there are big great whales. I think we're getting closer to some, which is really, really, really exciting. But I think this is not going to mean anything to anybody but us. But I think it's just like to just find the right balance to be able to kind of keep going at a good clip is what is on my mind always.
I guess I can say this great whale because I don't think anyone else would pick it up, unfortunately, is I would love to do a Sam Hui box set. Sam Hui, Michael Hui box set.
Okay.
Of some of the films that, like for instance, Private Eyes, which my sister and I can recite as the film goes, like these films that need the translation work really to get them out there. Yeah.
And something so close to like your childhood, your like cinematic origin story. That's really, really great. And listeners, if you're staying up until this point of the podcast, I really suggest you head over to Kani Releasing's website and check out their catalog. If you are living in a city like New York or LA or Chicago that sort of like has these repertory theaters that Kani is playing films at, please go check them out on the big screen. They really put a lot of effort into delivering really great films to you, and like taste makers in a sense. So thank you both so much for joining me on the podcast today and granting me, I don't know, the opportunity to talk through a lot of these really, really great films and putting them on other people's radars.
Yeah, and you're welcome. And thank you so much for having us on. Thank you for coming to visit us. Also, if your listeners find themselves this way, they're also welcome to visit us, and hopefully we'll have a bigger library by then, and would love to like engage with people in person. And yeah, is that too much? We don't want to see people?
Thank you, Wilson. Thank you so much.
Once again, a massive thank you to Ariel and Pearl for giving me their time and their insight in this interview. You can check out Kani Releasing's catalog at Kani, Kani-releasing.com. Thank you for listening to this episode of Deep Cut. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts to help others discover the show. A great way to support us is to leave a review or comment on our episodes directly on Spotify. If you want to chat with us and other fans of Deep Cut, come join our Discord server where we talk about movies, TV, music, and share what we're up to. If you'd like to share a message with us or have business inquiries, feel free to drop us an email at hello@deepcutpod.com. We read them and we will try to get back to you. We also have a Patreon if you'd like to support us with a monthly subscription. Thank you to all our Patreon supporters, and a very special thanks to our Patreon Deep Cut Pick supporters, Leah Lai and Nicholas Gao. You can keep up with Deep Cut on Instagram and Letterboxd at DeepCutPod. Check the link in our description or go to deepcutpod.com to find links to everything we've mentioned here. Deep Cut is hosted and produced by us, Wilson Lai, Benjamin Yap, and Eli Sands. Our cover art is designed by Justina Yam, and our theme song is composed by the one and only Eli Sands. I'm Wilson. Take care, and we're looking forward to talking about more movies with you next time.